Good evening, everybody, or good afternoon, depending on what time zone you are joining us from. Thank you so much for joining us. My name is Scott Sinclair. I'm the Senior Manager of Programs here at Cancer and Careers, and I want to welcome you to tonight's webinar. For those of you who are listening in on the phone, please send us an email to cancerandcareers@cew.org with the name and phone number that you're dialing in from. That way we can confirm your attendance and make sure you receive any relevant follow-up after the webinar. If you are new to Cancer and Careers, first of all, welcome. We are so glad to have you here. We are a national nonprofit and the only program of its kind solely dedicated to empowering and educating people with cancer to thrive in their work environment. This slide has a list of our free programs and services that we offer. Our comprehensive website, available in both English and Spanish, is the heart of everything that we do here. There you can find various support services, including our resume review service and access to career coaches. Our educational blog and news feed are both rich resources for those who have been diagnosed, their caregivers, employers, healthcare professionals. They all can stay current on topics related to work and cancer. Our free publication library is available both in English and Spanish, and those provide tangible, easy to digest information on working or looking for work after a cancer diagnosis. And those are available in both hard copy or PDF format. We also offer numerous events every year, from hour-long webinars like the one we're about to do right now, to full-day events. And I will be back on after Ali speaks to tell you a little bit more about what we have coming up. Now, for those of you who are seeking continuing education credits, this slide lists all the organizations who have accredited today's webinar, as well as the required steps for getting a certificate. This information is also available on our website. A link to the evaluation and the post-test will be shared at the conclusion of today's webinar. It's going to pop up in your browser after you close the webinar, so please take the time to complete that at that point. If you're unable to complete it today, that's fine. You're going to get an email tomorrow, no later than 5 p.m. Eastern, with all the information. Also, for those of you planning to request continuing education credits, our accrediting bodies require us to share this slide to let you know that there is no conflicts of interest to report. Now, as you might know, Zoom has a lot of great features that you can use to interact with the event with us and with other attendees. You'll see a Q&A box in your panel. If you have any questions today for Ali, feel free to drop them in that Q&A box. We will get to those at the end of the presentation. And we know the importance of privacy, so there is an option to submit your questions anonymously. And we'll do our best to answer everybody's questions. If we don't have time to get to yours today, please shoot us an email at cancerandcareers@cew.org, and we'll get you a one-on-one response as soon as we can. You'll also notice a chat box in your features panel. Feel free to use that chat box to communicate with our speaker, with myself and Maite, who are going to be monitoring it, and other attendees. Just one thing to note is the chat box is not private, and it will show your first and last name. So that's something to be mindful of if or when you choose to decide to engage in those chats. Also, just note, try not to put any questions in the chat box. We might miss them there. So if you have any questions for Ali, put them in the Q&A box and we will make sure we get there. Also, please note today's presentation is copyrighted. Therefore, the use of AI assistants or transcribing or recording devices of any kind by attendees is not allowed. Those found to be using AI or recording or transcription software during CAC programming will be removed from the event. You may be permitted to return when the AI recording or transcription software is turned off. Real-time closed captioning is available for today's event for those who need it, and a captioned recording of this webinar will be archived on our website following the session. To request any additional reasonable accommodations, please send an email to cancerandcareers@cew.org at least 24 hours before our next session. Now, thanks in part from Genentech and P&G Beauty, Cancer and Careers is proud to offer the 10th year of our Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series, which was created to provide anyone whose life has been touched by cancer with concise, targeted information about work-related issues that arise after a diagnosis. Additionally, we would like to recognize our year-round sponsors who support all of our core programs and allow us to continue providing all of our resources and services free of charge. Now, today's topic is something that many of us know is important, but can find kind of scary or challenging to apply in both our professional and personal lives. Setting boundaries can be a really valuable way to engage in self-care at the workplace, and implementing healthy boundaries allows you to be more in control and feel more empowered. And to help us explore this topic, we are delighted to have back Ali Schaffer. Ali is a licensed clinical social worker and has a private counseling practice in Nashville, providing individual and group therapy for adults navigating life transitions, coping with health challenges, and desiring to live life more fully. Again, I will be back at the end to tell you more about what we have coming up and to do some Q&A, but without further ado, I will pass it over to Ali. Welcome, Ali.
Thank you so much, Scott. I'm thrilled to be partnering with Cancer and Careers again for one of my favorite topics. And I also want to say welcome to all of you that are joining us and sharing this next hour together. I'm excited about what we're going to cover together. So let's take a look at workplace culture. There are so many different ways to work. And one of the things I am really excited about is there is more and more awareness, research, and conversation about work and about the impact of work on our individual and collective health. And one of the things I'd love to know as you look down this list of some of the different ways and work identities, I'd love you to drop into the chat. What's your work identity? Are you full-time? Are you self-employed? Are you the boss? Or are you doing gig economy? I'd love to know who's in the audience today, so feel free to drop it in the chat. So there was a really important study done in 2023 by the American Psychological Association that has some important information that's relevant to our conversation today. 77% of workers who took this survey reported having work-related stress in the last month, and 57% indicated experiencing negative impacts because of work-related stress. And what I really want to highlight is that workers are reporting they are not getting relief from the stress. So what we're talking about is chronic stress over time, and that has profound individual impacts. 1/3 reported their employers offer a culture where breaks are encouraged. That's not a great statistic. I also, from the report, it shows 21% reported that their employers offer meeting-free days. Okay, so I'm just sharing what's happening in the work environment. And 17% reported that their employer offers 4-day work weeks. Some additional stats that are concerning is looking at this quote: despite many workers reporting satisfaction with their work, individuals with a mental or physical disability are more likely to report experiencing toxic work environments. This is concerning because who we are talking about, who we are supporting today, sits at the intersection of work, disability, and cancer. So this has a lot of importance to our conversation. I'm also going to be talking about some of the data from Cancer and Careers research that shows work has positive psychological benefits. Okay, so it's important that we discuss this. Let's see, sorry, my clicker, let's go back. Whoop. So what I also want to highlight today is part of the cancer experience. For many people, as you well know, during our time together today, cancer can be a life-altering, life-changing, and highly disorienting experience that may come with upsides, and I'm not denying that. But what I really want to illustrate today is some of the difficult and challenging parts of the cancer experience. And people cope with the loss, the disruption, change, uncertainty, unknowns, grief, fear, isolation, and vulnerability in all sorts of different ways. There are many ways that you are and will, over time, respond to the cancer experience. And for some people, cancer can be a catalyst to reconsider your values and your needs and your relationship to work. And while you might not choose a cancer diagnosis, I'm not sure that I know anybody who does, you can certainly choose and have more empowerment about how you respond to the diagnosis. So, in the 2023 Cancer and Careers Harris Polls results, they identified a lot of really good information. Adults diagnosed with cancer want to work, and there are a lot of benefits of working for people navigating cancer. People have a desire to feel understood and need workplace accommodations, and having a support system in the workplace is quite advantageous. So, all in all, knowledge is power, and that's part of what we're here to do today. Because in their results, it says providing adults diagnosed with cancer the ability to navigate the workplace, the challenges they may face as it relates to their diagnosis, and even aid in their cancer care. Yet, many are left in the dark, lacking information and resources, not only from their employers, but also from their healthcare team. So today, we are educating and empowering you. So, with all of that, we know a few things. People navigating cancer treatment or have a history of cancer want to work and often need to work. And the landscape of work has drastically changed. And people navigating cancer diagnosis or treatment or history of cancer don't automatically know how to work well and sustainably with cancer in the mix. Sometimes the response and the expectation of people living with cancer invites people to keep working more, doing more than is actually humanly possible or sustainable. So today is the day to get honest with your limits and your needs. And a quote by Jen Fisher, who's the human sustainability leader at Deloitte, says, "Well-being and high performance are not at odds with another." That's really important to hear. Well-being and high performance at work are not at odds with one another. So I'm also here today to give you permission. You're allowed to want to work. You're allowed to want to be good at your job, and you're allowed to love your work. You're allowed to let it matter to you. And it is really helpful to have personal practices and tools like boundaries to support you in doing that. So, what can we do? One thing that we can do today is engage boundaries. This will have an immediate impact on your personal well-being. And on a practical, tactical, and strategic level, boundaries are a vital component of workplace wellness. They are a response to and prevention for burnout, quite a common experience these days, and also a way to support you being human in a modern world. So here's a quote to just take a moment to read. And one of the things that I really appreciate about this quote is adjust for the space that cancer is taking up in my life. Cancer comes in for many people often abruptly and changes the landscape of life and daily life. And therefore, it's necessary to adjust for the disruption of cancer, no matter how temporary or long-term it might be, by reorganizing and restructuring how and what you do on a daily basis. So here are a lot of quotes that I've heard over the years of working with people navigating cancer. This might sound like something you've said before, or one of your colleagues or one of your patients has talked about. It is not intuitive to do cancer sustainably and well when it comes to the work. People often overcompensate, overdo, overpromise, underdeliver at the personal cost of themselves. It's understandable. You're learning how to cope with cancer, a life-altering and life-changing experience. And it's not always easy to know how to do that well and over time. So my goal is to help you work well and sustainably with regards to the season of life that you are in. So during our time together tonight, here's a couple things I want to do. Get boundaries on your radar and into your conversations. I want to plant seeds for yourself and whomever you're coming into contact with that's navigating cancer. I want to offer you some ideas, some questions to consider, and even some different perspectives and frameworks about boundaries to play with and to see what feels good for you. We're also going to do some fourth quarter planning. So just take a moment to soak that in. We are in fourth quarter. So we're going to do some planning that's going to help you end the year well and begin the year well. I'm also going to normalize some of the uncomfortable parts of boundary setting. And if we're going to use the community that we've got today, it's why I'm engaging the chat. You're going to drop some wins later today. We're going to learn from each other. And we're also going to get to just think about what this means for us in our own lives. One of the things I want to say, try on what I offer. And most importantly, listen through the lens of you and your experience. That's going to help both of us out because I cannot speak to every individual experience or person who's on this call today. So I am going to ask you to help me out by listening through the lens of you. What's also important that I want to set the tone for today. I cannot change the work culture that you live in. I cannot, as an individual, overhaul employment issues. And also, it is not my intention to imply to you that you, as an individual, are responsible for overhauling said systems either, or to imply that you can fix systemic issues. I can and am inviting you to consider your well-being, so putting you and your well-being front and center as you listen to this tonight, and to think about what your well-being looks like and what actions and activities you might need in the realm of boundaries. So, what are boundaries? It's a great question. And maybe you know, and you might absolutely know, and maybe you don't, or maybe you have an idea. But here's kind of boundaries according to me. Boundaries are an act of self-love and a care of self tool. They can help you protect, preserve, and promote your priorities and your needs. They're both a response, an intervention, a protective strategy, and a maintenance tool to help you manage and intentionally live your life. I want you to live your life, not be lived by your life. And boundaries are about you because you and your needs matter. I'll say that again. You and your needs matter. I want to break some of the myths of boundaries because I think these days we have a very limited and reductive view of what boundaries are that actually is getting in the way from us using them well. Boundaries are not about shifting someone else's behavior or about other people. Boundaries are not a sign of weakness or a personal failure. And boundaries cannot override the reality of being human, having limits and limitations. Boundaries are also not a miracle cure. That's really important. While I am touting the wonders of boundaries today in this presentation, and I do so often, they cannot make up for an under-responsive, a non-responsive, or an unhealthy work environment. And that's really important to remember. No amount of good boundaries can make up for those things. Boundaries are also more than saying no, and boundaries are more than I can't. Just because you can doesn't mean you have to. The other thing about boundaries is they are personal and they are lifelong work. Every time I get to do this presentation, it's an invitation for me to really revisit and reevaluate my boundaries and to make some changes. And I do that. So I'm grateful for that. And I want you to keep evolving your boundaries with the season of life you're in and with your own needs. So take a moment to review this list and notice with honesty and compassion what's true for you. You can also come back to this outside of our time together to really look at this more closely and more critically. So, this is the cycle that we are working with that becomes a vicious cycle of unhealthy work boundaries that have important and profound personal impact. But the good news is it is possible to stop this cycle and with relatively little pain. Setting the right kind of boundaries can actually increase productivity, which I know is important to a lot of people, alleviate stress, super important, and actually turn a vicious cycle into a virtuous one. So, again, here's another moment. So, just take a breath and take a look over this slide and notice again with compassion and with curiosity what's true for you. Maybe you want to make a note. Maybe you want to come back to this later and just really looking, what are my personal boundary issues? It can be really helpful before you make changes to notice where you're at in this moment. And some of these might seem like no big deal. And on their own, maybe they're not. But over time and with the cumulative effect, or in the mix of what else is not working, they can really add up to be stressors and create some significant issues with work, with your health, and with your well being. So let's talk about the benefits of boundaries. So here I am trying to advocate for boundaries in your life, and it's important that you understand how they can help you enhance and improve the quality of life and promote healthy living. Feel a sense of control and normalcy. Remember that slide earlier about part of the experience of cancer? It's a loss of control and a loss of normalcy. So, boundaries can help you have the very things that you've lost and that you want. Boundaries can also help you find and practice enough. Like, where's your end point? When do you get to rest in your day or your week or your life when it comes to work and work assignments? It can also help you delegate and ask for help. Not always an easy thing, but an important thing as a human. I think boundaries really are such an adaptive, flexible, and responsive thing that we can loosen depending where we're at, or we can tighten up depending where we're at and what we're holding. And so here's another just way to look at this. Here are some of the benefits of healthy boundaries specifically at work. Helps you take care of you, and it's part of a comprehensive and personal care plan. I really wish the medical team, as much as they're talking about treatment options, are asking about and promoting boundaries as a way to do life and work, life, work, and cancer. Boundaries at work can help reduce conflict, role task, and duplication, really managing your energy, how much you're doing, how much you're overdoing. Helps you to prioritize responsibilities and decrease overwhelm, builds trust, helps again reduce overgiving, overdoing, and overhelping. Some of the very ways that people might cope with a cancer diagnosis. Boundaries at work can create emotional stability, help you to work through treatment sustainably, which might be one of your personal goals, and give you more of a sense of control and personal agency. Here's this quote that I really like: whether it be in our work or our personal lives, boundaries are important because they allow us the freedom of choosing what is right and best for ourselves in a way that keeps us psychologically healthy. That's Dr. Mariana Bakarova, a psychologist and psychology professor at the University of Toronto. And I even say boundaries are more than just psychological health. They're part of the whole picture of health, and you are a whole person. So let's look at this from another way. Again, sometimes people are going to be motivated by the benefits, and sometimes we might be motivated by the sting and the ouch and the costs of something. And there are a lot of significant costs of boundary issues at work. And so again, this might be another thing to look at and just notice, like, what's true for you? What feels personal? What might motivate you to make some changes, to let work work for you? So if boundaries are so great, if there's so much benefit to them, you might be wondering, like, so why isn't everybody doing them? Why aren't I doing them? And there's actually a lot of things that get in the way of setting boundaries. For some people, they never taught or learned how to have healthy boundaries. They don't even know what that looks like or what that is. There are also a lot of shoulds and obligations. I should be able to handle this. I shouldn't need to take off. I should be able to work every day or overtime. They also have a lot of fears. And a lot of these fears in this conversation connected to cancer is, if I set boundaries and I'm already navigating cancer, what if I lose my job? What if there's conflict? And I don't like having conflict. Ooh, somebody might retaliate against me. I'm going to have to deal with other people's reaction or discomfort. And then also, someone might not get something done. And if you're someone who values getting work done, you don't want to see the balls dropped. So it's too easy to say, no problem, I'll just do it. But when you say that too many times and too often and over time, that becomes a problem because your arms are so full with other work or more than your work. And then it's hard to undo that. And the cost is you burning out or dropping the balls, dropping the things that are so important to you. There's also some noticing some personal motivation, and this might be a thing to come back and look at. What is some of my personal motivation that might be getting in my way of setting boundaries? The thing that I want to remind you of, well, I haven't said it, so I'll say it for the first time. Boundaries are a skill that you can learn. So this is not something that you're either born with or not. It's a skill you can learn, and that's what we're doing today, is we're learning how to do boundaries. Outside of our time together, I invite you to come back and look at this slide, dig a little bit deeper with curiosity. What's getting in my way? I see the value of boundaries. I believe they can really help me, and I want to do this, but what's really stopping me? And it might also be very illuminating to see what's getting in your way. And that might be some breadcrumbs on what you need to skill build around or get some support so that you can successfully implement boundaries. This is a quote from somebody navigating cancer, and they said it beautifully. I've let work take over my life. I want to use my energy and my time actually living and doing things I enjoy. So, with all of that said, let's talk a bit more about some of the different kinds of boundaries. So here's where I'm offering you some perspectives and even some frameworks. I think sometimes it's really helpful to think about it like a 360 view, that sometimes we can find a doorway over there or over here, looking at it from beneath or above. And I want you to find your entryway into boundaries. And so what I love about these photos is, yes, I am that girl that walks in nature and sees these thorns on a tree or a bush and says, gosh, that tree has great boundaries. And wouldn't it be lovely if the world was set up that it was so obvious where we could touch, where we could go, where we couldn't touch, what we needed to stay away from, like the skunk, so that we didn't get skunked. But that's not the reality of the world we live in. Not all boundaries are clear and obvious. So this slide shows three different things. The one on the left being a door. And let me first say, with these three things, boundaries are helping you teach people how they can access you. So you're showing them the way in. And for some people, it's through the door. And that could sound like people can reach you by email or text versus a phone call. Or they can reach you through meetings on your calendar, or maybe a direct conversation. For some people, it's the middle, it's a wall. it's a no-go. They cannot access you. And that might sound like I am not available after hours or on weekends or whenever your off days are. That's a wall. They cannot access you. And then some are like this picture on the right where it's a fence and you're giving people more access, right? Maybe they can come into your office, although I'm not sure the horse on the right is really appreciating the way the horse on the left is entering their space. But sometimes it's really useful to think about what's the way I'm going to teach people and tell people they can have access to me and in what realms? Is it a wall? Is it a window? Or is it a door? Sorry, I said window and I meant to say fence. Another way to look at the different kinds of boundaries, again, I am a nature girl, and so I walk through nature noticing all kinds of metaphors about boundaries. But the one on the left, this is an evergreen. And some boundaries are evergreen, meaning they are in place all the time. And so for me, one of my evergreen boundaries is oof, out of office Fridays. I do not work on Fridays. And that is an evergreen boundary. The one in the middle is perennial, meaning they come back each year at the same time. And so that might be something like personal milestones, a birthday, summer vacation, a trip you take with your family every year, or your scans or certain treatment milestones. And so, again, you've got some perennial boundaries that you take off the shelf and you activate for those specific incidents and events that occur at the same time each year. And the one on the right is annual. And that means just for a season. So, as beautiful as the sunflowers are, they are around just for a season. And so that might look like boundaries in the fourth quarter as you're entering the holiday season, or maybe during summertime, that you take those boundaries off the shelf because you've identified certain things that are important to you, that are priorities, that you want to divert your time, energy, and resources to. And that could be like, I leave every Monday at 3 p.m. to attend my kids' baseball game. Or for the last quarter, I don't take on any new projects or clients because it's the end of the year. Or if you know you've got something treatment related coming up, you might again enact certain boundaries to support your well being and time management. It's important that you can realize as I'm talking about boundaries, it doesn't mean you won't think about work when you're not working or that you won't think about personal stuff during work. This is not to set up some unreasonable binary of work life. We're just trying to help you know how important it is to have dedicated work and dedicated time to recharge. And I really like this. There should be a palpable mind shift, the lifting of the weight of workplace responsibility and a sense that we're done for the day. And boundaries help that. So, this is a moment where I'm going to invite you back in, where we're going to get to educate and inspire each other. I want you to take a moment and think about what is or has been the most personally impactful boundary that you've activated. And I want you to drop it in the chat so we can learn from each other. Just take a moment and think about. I leave every Friday at 5 p.m. I don't check my email before I have breakfast. I pause before I say no. Yeah, great. This is gold to all of you who are entering your boundaries. And for those of you in the audience that don't know, that aren't really sure what it might look like, what a impactful boundary could be, or you're just fresh out of ideas, take a moment to read through the chat to get some ideas and see what sparks of inspiration might bubble up for you. This is great. You guys have some really, really good ones. Yes, I do not respond to emails immediately. Great. Love that. The pause button is hugely effective. Putting my phone on do not disturb. Excellent. Yeah. Keep them coming. I'm going to keep talking just in the essence of time, but I want you guys to keep dropping the wins in the chat. So now we're going to get to the point where we talk about your fourth quarter boundaries. Just giving you a moment to think about the fact again that we are in fourth quarter. And so, why this is important, and I kind of am highlighting transition times and periods of increased stress, is for many people, fourth quarter, when it becomes the holidays, that is a period of increased stress. And there's a lot of transition that's happening. And during transition times and periods of increased stress, what this also means is there's typically decreased bandwidth and capacity, potential increased uncertainty, and lots of unknowns that you might be navigating, changing timelines, and just general discombobulation. I don't know many people who don't experience moments of discombobulation in fourth quarter. And so boundaries can really help you do the fourth quarter well. I want to remind you, this is also temporary. And sometimes it helps reminding yourself that this is temporary, both to enact a boundary that might feel uncomfortable, and also that this season will shift and change. Another thing that I didn't put on the list that I'll add at another time is during times of transition and increased stress, limiting your draining activities can be a huge key. Noticing what fills you up and what drains you, and doing more of the fill up and less of the draining. So coming back to fourth quarter. So just to lay it out, October, which we're in, November, December, and I included January because that's a transition. We're just getting into the new year. So think about it. Kind of think about your fourth quarter as you sit right now. And I want you to think about this, and you're going to do more of this outside of our time. I'm just giving you the tools so you can sit down with intention and attention to do this work for yourself. But get out your calendar and look ahead. And even in your mind, as I'm talking, begin to scroll through your mental calendar. What's happening in October? What are the important events in November? What's going on in December? Are there specific things I want to show up for? What's really important to me? So begin to just write a couple of things down. We're just prepping you to be thinking about what's upcoming. And the good thing is, we're going to do this before you get into the thick of it, before you get into the discombobulation, which sometimes makes it hard to think clearly and consider what boundaries and actions might be really helpful. And remember, my goal that I told you earlier was to help you work well and sustainably. So we're doing this through looking ahead and being prepared for the next couple of months. It doesn't mean I'm expecting you, or could you possibly predict everything that's going to happen, but it's just practicing working with what we already know right now. So you've got a couple things down, and again, hit the highlights, hit what you know, and later you'll come back and think more carefully about each month. I also am introducing this holistic view. So here's where I'm just kind of hitting some bullet points, and then I'm going to bring them all together with you. The ability to work well is not only dependent on work. And so when we look at it from this holistic perspective, we can see the interconnection and the relationship between all of these things. And sometimes I like to look at it from this visual because we can't always change what's happening in some or one of our buckets. And in those cases, we can look to the other realms or buckets of our life of this holistic view to see what we might influence and shift and change for our well-being. And so it's almost like having a bunch of Play-Doh that you're playing with and manipulating to see what can you change, what can you move. Then it's really helpful when you're feeling stuck or you feel like I can't change certain parameters or structures. Great. Look to one of the other realms and let's see what you can do there. So, I, as you look at fourth quarter boundaries and the holistic view and what's on your plate, here's a couple questions that we're going to look at real briefly now. You're going to come back later and spend some meaningful time developing this for yourself, but you're going to ask your questions. What's on my plate right now? What's coming up? Again, looking week by week, day by day, month by month, however you do it. You're also going to begin to bring into the conversation what's important to me. Like, is it important for me to be peaceful for the rest of the year? Is it important for me to have meaningful connection and time with family and friends? Is it for me to complete some important work tasks that have a time sensitive deadline? Right? So you get to decide what is important to you in all the realms. And then also thinking, how do I want to show up and how do I want to feel? Do I want to feel like someone running at 150 miles an hour with my hair on fire? Or do I want to feel calm and grounded, present and grateful? Okay, like that's acceptable too, to just be like, okay, that might be the season you're in. And with those questions answered, I will. And this is where you're going to decide what your boundaries are. While you're asking those questions, you're also taking into account work things like work roles, responsibilities, company culture, leadership, your specific job tasks, and the things that only you can do, where you're at in your personal place of healing and recovery as it relates to cancer or anything else that might be happening in your life. If there's particular changes in your treatment plan that are upcoming, if you've got scans, other life events, and also noticing your personal bandwidth to experiment and implement with change. Because the reality is, boundaries often reflect a change. I was doing this and I'm now doing this. And we have to have some bandwidth and space and energy to be willing to do that. So, taking all that into consideration, and then looking at what boundaries can help you do fourth quarter. And then you're looking at what boundaries will you keep and what boundaries will you change. And as you take the time to answer this, the other thing that's really important is to review this often. Too often we write these great things down and then we like tuck them away and we never look at it. And then in 3 months, we're like, gosh, that didn't go well, or that didn't happen in the way that I wanted, because you need to stay engaged with your boundaries and your values and your priorities. And so looking at this, even a weekly basis, some people have a meeting with themselves every Monday morning or Friday afternoon, kind of whenever it works for you in your schedule. But look at your boundaries. This also helps you to catch what's working and what's not working, to make more quick course adjustments and corrections before it gets really wonky and out of control. And it also allows you to be more nimble and responsible or responsive to what comes up in real time that either you knew, but it's a bit different, or you didn't know. Because again, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't see everything that's coming, and you don't need to. That's not the point of this. But when you stay engaged and curious and in conversation with these questions and this assessment and evaluation, it really helps you to make the changes and do the decisions that benefit you and that really connect you to getting to experience all those benefits I laid out earlier in those slides. See? There we go. Okay. Going to go through this quickly, just in terms of some different ideas to try on. And here's where I'm offering some various different perspectives. Again, if you're like, I don't know what other boundaries to do, if you've looked through the chat, if you're still not landing on some things that feel good, this article offers a lot of great information. You can click on the link, you can follow it up outside of the webinar, but it can really differentiate some of the categories or ways to look at things that you could break it down to implement some boundaries around. Here's another robust, but not complete by any means, ideas about some different boundaries to try on. And a lot of you put some of these in the chat, which is great, but there might be some more that you're thinking about, or you're like, I don't know, maybe I could, but I'm not sure. Not all of these are possible where you work. Again, you're listening through the lens of you, but I want you to get creative. How might I do some of these things where I work and in my work environment and with what I can and can't do? One of the things that's so important, even if you do nothing else, email has become its own thing, as we all know. And so even if you do nothing else but be present when you check your email, that can be huge. So what I mean by that is not checking your work email when you're driving in traffic or when you're in the line at the deli counter at the grocery store. And yes, I know that is a weirdly specific example, and I will let you infer how I came up with that weirdly specific example. But the point being, even if you just get present, when I read this email, can I respond? No? Don't check it. Yes? Proceed. Here's another great book that offers so many great ideas, frameworks, thoughts about boundaries, things that boundaries at work can sound like, some really good examples. And so take a moment, and based on what we've done, this really quick overview of asking the questions, getting clear, putting some things in place about what's coming in this fourth quarter, I want you just to jot down 1 or 4 or more, whatever you've got, jot it down. You're going to come back to this. You can add to this, but just right now, let's capture what you've already generated and what's already here for you. It's worth noting that boundaries applied consistently and over time can have a significant impact. The cumulative effect of small actions, like only checking your email when you can be present and respond, really does matter. And it can help you feel like you have agency and can positively influence your experience. Couple of last things about fundamentals of boundaries, and then we're going to get to some questions. How to communicate boundaries. This is really simple. It's a bit more complicated, but also not. Be clear, be direct, follow up as needed. Have a plan to deal with questions, discomfort, or pushback if it arises. And remember, somebody else's curiosity is not your responsibility. You do not have to answer questions you do not want to answer. Get comfortable with no. You cannot do boundaries without being comfortable with no. And many people are not comfortable with no for various reasons, and that's okay. But boundary work gives you the opportunity to get comfortable with no. I took these examples from the Cancer and Career website, and you can just look at it. Here's some great ways to be clear, kind, direct in stating your boundaries, in stating no. So some tips for setting, resetting, and engaging boundaries. Because again, we don't just set a boundary one time. Sometimes we have to keep repeating it, resetting it, restating it. That is normal too. Start where it feels easiest and build from there. Again, you're building momentum, you're building consistency, and you're building confidence around something that you might not feel so confident with. Using the pause button, which is always helpful, slowing down and pausing when you're making behavior changes or implementing something that's new or uncomfortable. It just helps you have more presence and more equipment to do that. It's okay if it feels tricky to set boundaries or if you have feelings around boundaries. All of that is okay. Address your boundary conflicts or violations as soon as possible. Celebrate your wins and your attempts. Maybe you didn't get all the way or as far as you wanted to this time, but maybe you got further than you did last time. And that fuel and remembering is gold as you're doing something that maybe feels difficult or uncomfortable. So, a few last reminders. Again, be willing to start somewhere. That will help you get consistent, build momentum, and then add when you have capacity. Trying to implement too much all at once is a setup for you to just let it all drop, and then it's harder to restart. So it is better to start with something small and build as you go. Your boundaries are about you. Sometimes boundaries are for you to know, and sometimes they are to be communicated with other people. Use discernment. Use discernment. Not everybody needs to know. You don't need somebody else's permission. Sometimes you just need to do the thing, do the boundary, leave work at 5. You don't need to tell everybody, just leave. That can work too. Your boundaries will change over time. As your life changes, as your needs change, as the seasons of life change and what you're navigating and negotiating, your boundaries will change. Let them. It's not about being perfect with boundaries. It's about the practice of boundaries. And even if it's all done well, not all leaders and workplaces will respect your boundaries. And that's so important. I said it earlier. Boundaries can't make up for systemic issues, can't make up for unhealthy workplaces or bad managers. But boundaries can help you have the time and space that you need to make the choices that work best for you. So, with all of that being said, you can't do it all. You get to choose what you do. So please choose mindfully. Thank you so much for being here, for listening to this conversation about boundaries. I hope, even though we went through a lot of material very fast, I hope that you got something that you needed that you can put in place today. And I also hope that you will schedule some time in your calendar to go back and look at this, look at your fourth quarter and create boundaries to support you. And then you can get in the habit of doing this each month or each quarter. And I wish you well. I think we are ready for our Q&A.
Thank you, Ellie. I am vigorously taking notes here on both what you said and what people are dropping in the chat of boundaries that they've set, because I'm like, yeah, that's a good one. That's a good one too. I should do more of that.
Yeah, it's awesome. I'm so glad that you're inspired. I mean, that's the thing. There's so much experience and wisdom in this audience, and I love that you got to share.
Yeah, absolutely. So before we get to Q&A, I just have a few things to go over. First of all, if you have any questions, my email's on here. Feel free to reach out to me. Also, if you want to follow us on social, all of our handles are here, as well as our newsletter and our website where we have all of our information hosted. I want to tell you about a few upcoming events we have. We have 2 sessions left in this year's Balancing Work and Cancer webinar series. Next month, we are doing a session on balancing work and caregiving. And then following that in December, we're ending the year with self-care. Both of them are going to be really great. If you have any caregivers in your life that you want to send over our way, we'd love to have them. Or if you are not a caregiver and just want to listen in, that is also a great thing to do as well. And then next week, we have our West Coast Conference, which is happening on Saturday, October 19th. The West Coast really is a sort of misnomer. It's really in Pacific time, but you can join. It's going to be happening on Zoom. You're welcome to join from wherever you are in the world, really. Registration is free, and there's a link on this slide. Again, you should have received a link to the slides in the email around 5 o'clock this afternoon from Zoom, but if you want a copy, feel free to reach out to us and I'll send you one. And finally, I'm going to leave this slide up while we go into Q&A, which has all of the requirements for anybody requesting a CE this afternoon. Again, the link to the evaluation is going to pop up at the end of the session. We'd hope that everybody will fill that out, whether you're requesting CEs or not, but you'll also get a link to that tomorrow in an email as well. If you can't do it this afternoon or this evening, that's fine too. So now that we go into Q&A, I have a few questions here. And again, if you have a question, drop it in the Q&A box and we will try our best to get to it. But the first question I have here, Allie, is how do I manage the guilt I feel when I say no?
Yeah, so common. I'm so glad this came up because guilt and feeling guilty is a huge common experience for people when setting boundaries. And I think what's really useful is noticing that the guilt comes up when you set boundary and getting curious about what's the function of that guilt for you. So I'm getting a little in the weeds on this, but thinking about, is the guilt to say, oh, you shouldn't be doing this because that's not allowed because I don't believe I'm worthy of doing this. But so getting really curious about the guilt, and then also, as you're doing that, maybe even normalizing, okay, so I'm probably going to feel guilt when I set a boundary. And it doesn't mean the boundary is wrong or bad or that I shouldn't set it. But this is just something that typically comes up when I do something for me or when I set a boundary and say, this is not working or this is how I want to work. And so guilt is very normal. Get curious about what's the function of it for you and let your commitment to yourself and your boundaries be greater than your experience of guilt. We don't necessarily need to set a boundary with the expectation we won't feel guilt, and it can be in the room.
I mean, that is something I feel all the time when I have to say no to something or feel like I'm being a bad employee because I push back a little or, try to set that boundary. So I can definitely relate to that
Yeah. And
wholeheartedly.
compassion, like be so
Yeah.
compassionate when that guilt comes up. And when you soften with compassion towards that guilt, you may be able to keep moving through it differently.
Yeah. The next question I have here is how can I set boundaries with my micromanaging manager in a respectful and professional manner?
Yeah, another good one. And a lot of people do feel the sort of suffocation of micromanagers. So there can be a way to get curious and just observe, hey, I notice you're really following up a lot or with a lot of frequency on these certain things. And how I work best is blank, blank, blank. And so in that way, you're really laying out, you're observing what you're noticing, and then you're saying, here's what would work best for me. So you're making a request around that, and then there may be room for a conversation or negotiation so that you and your micromanaging supervisor or boss can find a middle ground. And then you also might have to keep reminding said boss of this new way of working and relating together because people often need reminding. And I'm not saying that's going to magically stop your micromanaging boss from micromanaging you, but it may begin to shift things for you or give you a little bit of space as you're working together.
Sometimes people might not even realize they're micromanaging or getting in the way of things. So having that kind of honest dialogue, I think, is really great in so
Yes.
many situations at work. And
Yes.
and keeping it professional and respectful. Like I like the way that this was worded because you don't want to be bratty or, indignant or anything like that, but you want to get your, frustrations heard so that something might change. We
Yeah.
always say here that, in a little different context, but the only definite no that you'll get is to a question not asked.
Yes.
So if you aren't verbalizing these frustrations, it probably will never get fixed or changed too.
Yes, and in it, talk using I statements and talking about your personal experience. I'm having a really like I notice you blank whatever the micromanaging behavior is, and I'm having a really hard time staying focused while I'm doing my work, right? So you're also
Yeah.
inserting your personal experience from an I statement, and then you're asking for a request or a change.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So unfortunately, we're already at 7 o'clock right here. We have time for one more question. If we don't get to your question again today, so sorry, please shoot us an email, cancerandcareers@cew.org. Or if you think of a question next week or next month or whenever, we're always available to help whatever you need there. So Ali, our last question here is, how do I communicate when I'm physically unable to do something at work without making a big deal about it?
Yeah. So in that clear, kind, and direct. And sometimes the big deal comes up or the big deal is internal because we're feeling so much about stating our limits and limitations. So being very clear, very direct, and keeping it simple without apologizing, but just stating what you can or can't do. And if there's something you're offering instead, saying that. And then doing the work outside of that communication with yourself of being so kind with whatever's coming up because you can't do something.
Yeah, everyone has limits, whether you are, in treatment and having side effects or, it's 10 years later. Like there's limitations that everybody has in a work context. So sometimes you
Yes.
just have to verbalize those. Again, no one's gonna
Yes.
know that you're not gonna be able to pick up that 50-pound box if you don't say anything. But trying to
Right.
pick up that 50-pound box is also not gonna work for you.
Right. And I'm so glad you made that point too, because one of the things I didn't say at the beginning is boundaries are for humans, and we're talking about it in this way today, bringing in the cancer and the health piece because that's the focus of this conversation. But universally, all humans have limits, all humans need boundaries, and all humans benefit from boundaries. And so sometimes even also like taking a step back to look at it from that realm may help you have more confidence that like, oh yeah, everybody's got limits, everybody needs boundaries.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, Ali, thank you so much for being here tonight. I love this presentation so much. I am gonna go in tomorrow morning and set all these kinds of boundaries with all of my
Yes.
coworkers.
Well, small steps, step at a time. But
Yeah.
okay. But I love the fire. I love the fire.
And thank you all for joining us. Again, if we didn't get to your question, I'm so sorry, but cancerandcareers@cew.org, and we will make sure that we get an answer for you. And we hope that we'll see you next month. Have a good night.
Thank you.